And welcome back into the Extra Point here on WEGL 91.1 FM or online at WEGLFM.com. Joining me in the studio today is Carter Bird. And Carter, we have a special guest here on the show today as we will welcome in on the phone. It is Marc Weiszer. He's the Georgia beat writer for the Athens Banner-Herald and an 8-time APSC winner. Marc, how you doing today?
I'm good. How you doing?
We're doing pretty good. So we just want to talk to you about Georgia basketball. Obviously, Auburn's taking on Georgia tomorrow, and I keep looking at this Georgia team, and it's what the SEC record says I don't think is indicative of what this Georgia team can be. So we just want to pick your brain about what's the strength of this Georgia team. We looked at rebounding, and obviously Georgia is one of the best, especially at offensive rebounding in the SEC. But what other strengths does this Georgia team have?
Well, the big issue for Georgia this year has been taking what personnel was left when when Georgia administration decided to change coaches and fitting it into what Tom Crean's trying to do with his program, which is up tempo, which is shooting threes. It doesn't necessarily have a great match. He's going to need some time to bring in guys that kind of fit that system. He's kind of taken his lumps with the losses, deciding that he's going to play his style of ball, no matter what, just to set a tone to show recruits what they want to be. But they do have size. They can rebound well. What they lack is a true point guard, and that's really apparent in a lot of games where they just turn the ball over way too much. They've had some tough stretch the last 3 games where they've at least played very competitively and just lost in the last possession or two. But before that, they were getting blown out in a lot of games. So their record probably did indicate at that point, where they matched up with others in the SEC. But lately, they've been very close to pulling one of these out.
So what was it that really, these past 3 games, it's very apparent. They were blown out the previous three before these past 3, and the last 3 have been against probably higher quality teams in the conference. What's been the biggest difference that's allowed them to compete with LSU and a good Mississippi State team, and then go on the road and compete at Ole Miss and only lose those 2 games by 1 point?
Part of the deal is against LSU they had 11 turnovers, they had 11 turnovers, and against Mississippi State they had 9. I don't remember exactly what it was the last game out against Ole Miss. I think it was actually closer to maybe 18 or so, but that definitely helps. They were at least holding onto the ball better, getting a chance to run their offense. And they've switched up their lineup, but Tom Crean started Christian Harris in the last 3 games. He's a walk-on that was on scholarship at Troy, but transferred to Georgia a few years ago and really didn't have a role. He played 2 games last season, but he's a good energy guy, a very good defender. I guess Crean thought he had nothing to lose with the way things were going, and he started in the last 3 games, and he doesn't necessarily show up in the box score, but can be a very good matchup defender, has some size for a guy that plays on the perimeter, and has given them a little bit of energy.
So what was obviously everybody in the SEC and a lot of people in the country saw how the Mississippi State game ended and Georgia's huge comeback to lose in backbreaking fashion. Was it a little bit of a surprise to see Georgia go on the road and play so well against the Ole Miss team that's been right there at the top of the conference all year?
Not really. Like I said, the last 2 games with LSU and Mississippi State, Georgia's shown more competitiveness, they haven't laid down like they certainly can, unless they make an improbable run to win the tournament and their season's ending in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they were inspired by feeling that they got something stolen away because of the technical foul that was pretty questionable, and then also when they looked at the tape, Jordan Harris, who fouled the shooter, Witherspoon at the end of that Mississippi State game, they thought he was kind of pushed into the shooter, so they were pretty fired up probably about that as well. And who knows? I imagine anytime you have a Georgia team that has one conference loss, maybe they're not getting Ole Miss's best shot maybe I know Ole Miss had their minds elsewhere. Some of the players with what was going on their campus as well. I don't know if that played anything into it, but Georgia. It'll be interesting with Auburn coming to town and struggling a little bit recently as well. Georgia's had a good home atmosphere, and there's no reason to think that game shouldn't have a chance for Georgia to pull out a surprise as well.
Gotcha.
So speaking of Auburn, what does Georgia have to do to beat this Auburn team that's honestly going to be on a bit of a hangover after that drubbing they took against Kentucky?
I think keeping the turnovers down is a big key for them. I mean, getting hot. I mean, Georgia's hasn't won. I think they have one win since early January, when they beat Texas at home, and they just went crazy shooting the three ball that day. So they need to be hot. Tyree Crump probably needs to have a big game. He's a very streaky 3-point shooter. And they probably need to do a good job containing Harper, who killed him last time. I think he had 22.7 assists. So those are probably some of the important things for Georgia. It's also a 9:00 tip, which it'll be the latest tip for Georgia at home this season. It'll be interesting to see how the students, I guess they'll be there, but whether the regular season ticket holders, if they want to get home at midnight that night or just stay home and watch it.
Obviously, you mentioned earlier that this is Tom Crean's first year, and he may not have the guys that he wants to fit his system. How do you think Tom Crean's first year has stacked up to the expectations of the Georgia fans?
Well, it depends who's looking at it. I mean, clearly 1-13 in the conference. Georgia is exactly where they were projected right now in the preseason. I mean, they were picked 13th in the conference, and that's where they are, thanks to Vanderbilt being 0-14. I picked them 12th, so I guess they're one spot less. I mean, Mark Fox didn't leave the cover bare. I mean, Nicholas Claxton showed some flashes last season, and he's taken a big step this year. Rayshawn Hammonds was a top 50 type recruit. He's been very inconsistent this year, probably not playing as well as he should. And as I mentioned, Tyree Crump has some scoring ability. Jordan Harris is a guy that has some athletic ability, can drive to the basket. It shouldn't be a 1-13 team. I mean, and they've had some close calls, like I said, lately. But I kind of thought they would win maybe 5 or 6 SEC games, and it's not going to be that many. So on the court, it's been a disappointment for Georgia. But in recruiting, which is what probably is more important in the first year of a new regime, I mean, they have the number 12 recruiting class in the nation. They have arguably the number 1 recruit in the nation has committed to Georgia, Anthony Edwards. He's a combo or more of a shooting guard, I guess, out of Atlanta, who's projected by many to be at the top NBA draft pick in 2020. So yeah. I think people would rather take the recruiting wins and deal with the losses this year. But on the court, it's probably been a little bit tougher than people thought.
So in recruiting, has Georgia addressed the needs that you've laid out already with the lack of a point guard? Have they addressed that? And then the 3-point shooting to go with a team that's going to run and shoot threes, kind of similar to what Auburn does right now.
Yeah, they have to a certain extent. I mean, Anthony Edwards isn't a true point guard, but he's, from what I'm told by people that follow recruiting very thoroughly, that the ball is going to be in his hands, a lot of time anyway. So he may not be exactly, but he does so many good things. He can shoot the three, he can drive. He's a terrific player. So they'll definitely the offense between him and then assuming Claxton and Hammonds come back. And you're seeing those guys show up in some 2020 mock drafts in the top 40 as well. That's a good trio to start with, and they have a couple other top 100 recruits as well. So I think the answer is they're definitely going to be tournament contending next season.
So I guess to wrap it all up, SEC tournament's coming up. So I just want to know who's your favorite to win, and then also who's the sneaky underdog that we should watch out for.
It's a good question. I mean, I don't think many people necessarily thought that LSU would be up there with Kentucky and Tennessee. I mean, it's hard to go against Kentucky in the tournament, even though it's not the end-all and be-all for them. They just travel so well, and they make any town seem like another type of Lexington. So I I guess I would say Kentucky. It'll be interesting to see how LSU closes now with the distraction of the Yahoo Sports report involving Will Wade and that he's going to be subpoenaed for the FBI trial, if that's going to take some of the steam off their season. In terms of an under-the-radar team, as I'm looking at I guess, South Carolina is fourth in the conference now, tied for fourth, I guess, with Ole Miss. So, I mean, they're going to have a lot to play for, that's for sure, because they're not a lock to make the NCAA tournament. But a team that high in the conference, I can't really say. Let's go with I don't know, maybe an Alabama, somewhere that's a team that really needs to probably get to the semis or something like that. Maybe they can make a run. It's probably a team that usually doesn't that does need to show something there that could be dangerous. So I don't necessarily see any of the teams that are going to be playing on Wednesday having a chance to get very far.
Gotcha. Thanks for joining us, Mark. Where can everybody who's listening or watching catch all of your written articles and stuff like that?
Just go to onlineathens.com, and we got all our Bulldog coverage right there.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
All right. Good to be with you guys.
Thank you. That was Marc Weiszer joining us, talking about Georgia basketball, giving us some good insight on what Georgia does and what's going to bring to the table. And, when you look at it and you look at Georgia basketball and all that they do, at least the future does look bright for the Bulldogs, doesn't it, Carter?
It does. It looks like they're going to bring back Claxton and Hammonds, who have been the two ringleaders for them on offense and on the boards. And then you don't look like you lose much. I don't think you're going to lose Tyreek Crump. I think he's coming back. And if that's the case, you bring back all three of your leading scorers. And then you're going to lose a couple seniors. But if Georgia's bringing in a top 12 recruiting class, I'm assuming they're going to be able to slide in and replace those seniors pretty well. And I expect this Georgia team, top to bottom, there's a lot of sophomores, there's a lot of freshmen, and there's a few juniors. You'll lose a handful of seniors, but only a couple of them play really significant roles on this team. Obviously, one of them's even a walk-on that Mark was talking about, that Georgia has started the past couple games just for his energy. And, I think this Georgia team very much can take it the next step forward next year and really compete in this conference and for sure be potentially one of those teams in the tournament.
Yeah, it's not out of the question that teams can make a big jump. We
saw it with Auburn last year.
We've seen it. I guess it's not as big of a jump as Auburn, but Ole Miss is definitely,
for sure,
came back strong. South Carolina's played solid. LSU, I mean, it wasn't a 1 year jump, but let's not forget where LSU was a couple of years ago. It was not a good place.
With Ben Simmons not even making the tournament?
Yeah. And so, it's not out of the ordinary. And if Georgia can really retool and get the guys that Tom Crean wants, I mean, the ceiling is I say the ceiling. Georgia can break through the ceiling and really, impress some people and, just be the team that people want them to be. Really.
I agree.
So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk the AP poll for college basketball, kind of just run through that and, kind of see where a lot of these teams should be or shouldn't be in the AP poll, as we got some movers up and down in it. You'll listen to the Extra Point here on WEGL 91.FM or online at WEGLFM.com.